Colonel John McGill never imagined his knees would touch the red dust of the West Texas plains before a simple rancher. But there he was, his hands trembling as he held Ben's, begging forgiveness for nearly destroying the life of the man who had saved his daughter. The dry wind swept across the scrub brush and mesquite, carrying the sweet scent of desert wildflowers blooming after a scant rain. It was late afternoon, and a golden sky stretched over the vast plains, where stories intertwined like the dry branches clinging to life in the drought. In this landscape of harsh beauty and resilience, Ben Rogers' life continued its natural course, marked by the simplicity and dignity only truly good men possess. Ben woke each morning before sunrise, when only the chirping of mockingbirds broke the stillness of dawn. His calloused hands, shaped by years of honest work, held firmly the reins of Whirlwind, his horse as white as the rare clouds that crossed the intense blue sky. Whirlwind wasn't just an animal to Ben, he was his journey companion, a silent witness to the long rides across the dusty trails where the rancher herded Colonel John McGill's cattle from one pasture to another. The colonel was a well-known figure throughout the region, owner of the most fertile lands, the best watering holes, and the largest herd. He wielded an influence that extended far beyond the boundaries of his property. His word was law, and few dared to contradict him. A man of wealth and tradition, a descendant of a lineage of ranchers who shaped the history of West Texas, John McGill had built an empire based on unquestionable authority and the respect his social position afforded him. Ben had worked for the colonel for over 10 years, always fulfilling his duties with the punctuality and dedication that characterized his nature. He had never missed a day, never lost a head of cattle, never failed to obey an order. His reputation for honesty and competence had spread to neighboring ranches, and many employers had tried to hire him, offering higher wages. But Ben was a man of his word, and his loyalty to the colonel remained unshakable. It was on one of these afternoons that Ben rode back to the campsite, tired but satisfied with another day's work completed. The sun set on the horizon, painting the scattered clouds red and orange. The heat of the day gave way to the cool evening breeze, and Whirlwind trotted steadily along the dirt road, his hooves producing a rhythmic beat that blended with the chirping of crickets and the distant howling of coyotes. That's when Ben spotted a small figure by the roadside. His eyes, accustomed to identifying any movement in the vastness, realized it was a child. She was alone, soaked from the light rain that had begun to fall, her dark hair clinging to her delicate face. Ben pulled Whirlwind's reins and carefully dismounted, approaching the girl with the caution of someone who doesn't want to frighten a wounded bird. "Sir, help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with fear and hope. Ben felt his heart clench. Before him stood a child who couldn't be more than 8 years old, completely helpless in the immensity of the plains. Without hesitation, he took off his jacket and wrapped it around the girl, carefully lifting her and placing her on the saddle in front of him. Whirlwind, as if understanding the urgency of the situation, remained motionless throughout the operation. Ben's campsite was simple: a small canvas tent, a few basic supplies, and a fire he lit every night. This is where the rancher spent his hours of rest, contemplating the stars and planning the next day's activities. That night, however, his attention was entirely focused on the girl who trembled with cold in his arms. He lit a lantern and prepared a warm herbal tea. While the girl drank the comforting liquid, Ben waited patiently until she felt safe enough to tell her story. Gradually, between sobs and broken words, the child revealed that she had run away from home after a mysterious fire had destroyed her house. She was alone, without identification, without family nearby. "I'm a daughter of someone who loves me," she said, her frail arms trembling not only from the cold, but from a vulnerability that deeply touched Ben's heart. In those simple words, Ben recognized a truth that transcended any document or certificate. True love doesn't need papers to manifest itself. He wiped away the tears that welled up in his own eyes and, with the natural authority of a good man, declared, "Stay with me until sunrise. Tomorrow, I'll take care of you." The night passed slowly, With Ben watching over the girl's sleep and reflecting on what fate had placed in his path. He didn't have much to offer. His life was simple, his resources limited, but he possessed something more valuable than any material wealth, a generous heart and an unshakable faith in human kindness. When the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ben watched the girl play beside the makeshift corral where Whirlwind grazed. There was something magical about that scene. Her smile seemed to illuminate the entire area, as if her presence brought a special light to that arid corner of the plains. It was at that moment that Ben made a decision that would forever change the course of his life. Whirlwind was his most precious possession. The horse represented not only his means of transportation and work tool, but also his independence, his professional dignity, and, in a way, his identity as a cowboy. He was an animal of good lineage, strong and resilient, who had cost Ben years of savings and sacrifice. Many ranchers had been interested in buying him, offering considerable sums, but Ben had always refused because Whirlwind was more than a horse. He was his journey companion. That morning, however, observing the pure joy of the girl, Ben felt a surge of tenderness that surpassed any practical consideration. He knew he couldn't adequately care for Whirlwind in the long run. His iterative life, always moving from pasture to pasture, didn't offer the animal the care it deserved. Besides, the girl needed something to give her hope, something that represented a new beginning in her life. "Whirlwind is yours now," Ben said, handing the reins to the girl. "Take good care of her." The child's face lit up like never before. She hugged the animal's neck with so much affection that Whirlwind whinnied softly, as if also understanding the magic of that moment. Ben smiled, feeling light for the first time in months. He had discovered that true wealth wasn't in what one possesses, but in what one is able to give. Stories like this remind us that genuine kindness still exists in the world. If you appreciate stories that touch the heart and reveal the best of human nature, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving narratives that celebrate the hope and compassion that transform lives. What Ben didn't know was that his good deed had been witnessed by some cattle drivers passing through the area. News of the cowboy's kindness spread quickly through the neighboring ranches, reaching the ears of people who had long been searching for a missing girl. The child Ben had taken in wasn't just any orphan. She was Isabel, the only daughter of Colonel John McGill. The colonel had lost his wife years ago, and Isabel was the light of his life, the reason for his existence. When the mysterious fire destroyed part of his house and the girl disappeared, John McGill plunged into the deepest despair. He organized tireless searches, offering generous rewards to anyone who brought news of his daughter. But the days passed without any clues. The powerful colonel, accustomed to controlling everything around him, found himself completely powerless in the face of the most terrible loss a father can face. Tony, the colonel's trusted henchman, had traveled all the trails in the region, questioning cowboys, cattle drivers, and residents of the neighboring ranches. He was a tough man, molded by the needs of someone who needs to enforce the boss's authority. But he also shared John McGill's grief, as he had known Isabel since she was little and had developed a paternal affection for her. When news about Ben and the girl reached Tony's ears, he didn't waste any time. He rode all night until he found the cowboys' camp, arriving at dawn on the third day since Isabel had been found. His heart beat fast, torn between the hope of having found the girl and the fear of yet another disappointment. Tony recognized Whirlwind before he even saw Isabel. The horse was known throughout the region for its beauty and the loyalty it showed to Ben. When he saw the girl playing beside the animal, Tony was sure he had found the colonel's daughter. "Give me back the animal," Tony demanded, his voice heavy with authority and urgency. "And where is my daughter?" Ben, surprised by the henchman's sudden arrival, didn't immediately understand what was happening. To him, the girl was still the helpless orphan he had taken in out of Christian charity. The idea that she could be someone important's daughter hadn't even crossed his mind. "I don't understand what you're saying," Ben replied, instinctively protecting Isabel. "The girl has no family. I found her abandoned on the road." Tony, pressed by the urgency of taking the girl back to the colonel, had no patience for explanations. He had seen his boss's despair, the sleepless nights, the anguish that consumed the most powerful man in the region. Nothing else mattered besides reuniting father and daughter again. "This girl is Isabel McGill, daughter of Colonel John McGill," Tony declared, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Ben felt the world crumble around him. Isabel, the girl he had welcomed with so much affection, was the daughter of the most powerful man in the region. Whirlwind, the horse he had given her as a symbol of love and hope, was claimed as the colonel's property. Everything he had done out of kindness and compassion was being questioned as if his intentions were suspect. "I didn't know," Ben murmured, his voice choked. "I just wanted to help." Tony, interpreting Ben's hesitation as resistance, became more threatening. "You will return the girl and the horse now, or you will have to explain to the colonel why you are keeping his daughter away from home." At that moment, Ben faced a dilemma that revealed the true character of his soul. He could have handed Isabel over immediately, avoiding any complications. He could have explained that it was all a misunderstanding, that his intentions were pure. But something in his heart prevented him from simply handing over the girl without being sure she would be safe and happy. "I won't hand over the girl until I'm sure that's what she wants," Ben declared, surprising himself with his own courage. "If she really is the colonel's daughter, let him come and get her personally." Tony didn't expect this reaction. He was used to dealing with people who bowed before the colonel's authority, who obeyed without question. Ben's attitude disconcerted him, but it also aroused in him a kind of reluctant respect. "You don't know who you're messing with," Tony warned. "Colonel John McGill isn't a man to trifle with. When he finds out you're hindering his daughter's return, there won't be a power in the West Texas plains that can protect you." Ben swallowed hard, but didn't back down. "I'm not hindering anything. I'm protecting a child who came to me for help. If the colonel wants the girl, let him come talk to me like a man." While the two men argued, Isabel watched with wide eyes. The girl had developed a genuine affection for Ben, seeing in him the protective figure who had saved her life. At the same time, Tony's words stirred dormant memories, fragments of a life before the fire that had temporarily erased her identity. "Tony?" she murmured, her voice trembling but filled with recognition. The ranch hand felt his heart quicken. "Isabel, my girl, you remember me?" "I remember," she said, approaching cautiously. "Where's my father?" Tony knelt before the girl, his eyes filling with tears. "Your father is desperate to find you, girl. He believes you died in the fire. You need to go home." Ben watched the scene with a mixture of relief and melancholy. Relief because he finally understood that Isabel had a loving family, and melancholy because he knew he would have to say goodbye to the girl who had brought so much light into his simple life. "I want to see my father," Isabel said, but then turned to Ben. "But I don't want to leave you alone. You saved me." Ben smiled, despite the ache in his chest. "I'll be all right, girl. You need to go back to your family." Tony, finally understanding Ben's true intentions, softened his tone. "The colonel will want to talk to you," he said, "but not as an enemy, as someone who saved what he holds most precious in the world." In the days that followed, news of Isabel's return spread like wildfire. Colonel John McGill, who had spent weeks in the deepest despair, couldn't contain his joy. But along with happiness came curiosity and, subsequently, the need to meet the man who had taken his daughter in. Ben was summoned to the colonel's ranch house, an imposing structure that symbolized the power and tradition of the McGill family. He rode there one sunny morning, wearing his best clothes and with a heart heavy with uncertainty. He didn't know if he would be received as a hero or a suspect, rewarded or punished. The ranch house was a testament to the family's wealth and prestige. Its whitewashed walls reflected the sunlight, and the painted wooden windows framed the building with elegance. Around it, well-kept gardens contrasted with the harsh scrub brush and mesquite, demonstrating that water was not a problem there, and that nature could be tamed by human will. Ben was received in the main room, a spacious environment decorated with heavy dark wood furniture and family portraits that seemed to observe him with authority. Colonel John McGill stood before a window, looking out at the courtyard where Isabel played with other ranch children. When he turned to Ben, the colonel revealed a middle-aged man with neatly trimmed graying hair, a carefully combed mustache, and eyes that reflect both authority and intelligence. His posture was erect, his clothes impeccable, and his presence filled the room with an aura of power that few possess. "So, you're the man who saved my daughter?" the colonel said, his voice deep and measured. Ben took off his hat and held it in both hands. "I only did what any Christian would do, Colonel." "Any Christian?" John McGill repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do you have any idea how many people passed that road in the days my daughter was lost? How many saw her and did nothing?" Ben didn't know what to answer. He had acted on instinct, following the dictates of his conscience and his Christian upbringing. It had never occurred to him that his actions could be considered exceptional. "My daughter told me everything," the colonel continued, approaching Ben. "How you took her in, how you cared for her, how you gave her hope when she needed it most. But she also told me you gave her your horse." Ben lowered his eyes. "Whirlwind is a special animal. I thought the girl deserved to have something beautiful in her life." The colonel stopped in front of Ben, studying him carefully. "Did you know that horse is worth more than a year's wages?" "Yes, sir," Ben replied, his voice almost a whisper. "And even so, you gave it to a girl who believed herself to be an orphan?" "She needed it more than I did," Ben said, finally raising his eyes to meet the colonel's gaze. John McGill was silent for a long moment, absorbing Ben's words and attitude. He had known many men throughout his life, some driven by greed, others by ambition, most by self-interest. He had rarely encountered someone who acted with such purity of intention. "I could have you arrested," the colonel said, his voice becoming colder. "After all, you kept my daughter for days without searching for her family." Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. "I didn't know who she was, Colonel. She told me she had no family." "But you could have contacted the authorities, conducted searches," the colonel insisted. "Why didn't you?" Ben hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and decided to be completely honest. "Because I thought she was better off with me than abandoned to her own fate. I might not have had much to offer, but I had a heart willing to protect her." Ben's reply struck a deep chord in the colonel's heart. He recognized in those words the same simplicity and purity he'd seen in his daughter's eyes when she spoke of the cowboy who'd saved her. "You know what impresses me most about you?" the colonel asked, his voice softening. "It's not just the fact that you saved my daughter. It's that you were able to love her as if she were your own, even without knowing who she was." Ben felt his eyes welling up. "She's a special girl, Colonel. Anyone would fall for her." "No," the colonel said, shaking his head. "Not just anyone. You're a special man, Ben Rodriguez, and special men deserve special recognition." The colonel approached the window again, watching Isabel playing in the yard. "My daughter asked me not to take Whirlwind from you. She said the horse represents the love you showed her, and that it would be unfair to separate them." Ben was surprised. "She said that?" "She did, and I agree," the colonel replied, turning to Ben. "Whirlwind is yours, and always will be. But I'd like to make a proposition." The colonel stopped before Ben, extending his hand. I need someone trustworthy to manage my ranch, someone who understands that true wealth isn't in what you possess, but in what you're able to do for others. Would you be my partner?" Ben looked at the colonel's outstretched hand, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. "Partner, Colonel? Manager of my ranch, responsible for my cattle, advisor in my decisions, someone I can trust as I trust myself." At that moment, Ben understood that his life had taken a completely unexpected turn. He had lost everything by giving Whirlwind to Isabel, but he had gained something much greater: the respect and trust of the most powerful man in the region. "I accept, Colonel," Ben said, shaking the outstretched hand, "but with one condition." The colonel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What condition?" "That I can continue to be the same man who saved your daughter, that I can continue to help those in need, even if it means disobeying orders or defying authority." John McGill smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "That's precisely why I want you as a partner." The two men sealed the agreement with a firm handshake, but the colonel wasn't finished. He approached Ben, placing a hand on his shoulder. "There's something else I need to tell you," the colonel said, his voice choked with emotion. "I almost committed a terrible injustice against you." Ben was confused. "How so, Colonel?" "When Tony told me you were hesitant to return Isabel, I was furious. I thought you might be trying to take advantage of the situation, perhaps asking for money in exchange for my daughter." Ben was shocked. "Colonel, I would never." "I know that now," the colonel interrupted, "but at that moment, blinded by despair and grief, I was ready to do anything to get my daughter back. I almost sent my men to get you by force." The colonel paused, his eyes reflecting shame and remorse. "It was Isabel who stopped me. She told me you were a good man, that you had cared for her with affection and respect. She made me promise that I wouldn't harm you." Ben felt his heart race at the thought of what might have happened. "Colonel, Let me finish," the colonel said, raising his hand. "I want you to know that I acknowledge my mistake. I almost destroyed the life of the man who saved my daughter. This taught me a valuable lesson about hasty judgments and the importance of truly knowing people before drawing conclusions." The colonel then did something that deeply shocked Ben. He knelt on the ground, holding the cowboy's hands in his. "Ben Rodriguez," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I beg your forgiveness. Forgiveness for doubting your intentions, forgiveness for questioning your goodness, forgiveness for almost committing a terrible injustice against you." Ben was paralyzed, watching the most powerful man in the region kneel before him, asking for forgiveness. It was a scene he had never imagined witnessing, a moment that revealed the colonel's true greatness of character. "Colonel, please, get up," Ben pleaded, trying to lift the man. "There's nothing to forgive. You were desperate for your daughter. Any father would do the same." "No," the colonel said, remaining kneeling, "not any father. Only a father who truly loves his daughter and who recognizes his own mistakes." Finally, the colonel stood up, but kept Ben's hands in his. "I learned something important from you, Ben. I learned that true nobility doesn't come from blood or social standing, but from the capacity to love and to do good without expecting reward." At that moment, Isabel entered the room, running to hug her father first and then Ben. "Daddy, did you make peace with Uncle Ben?" The colonel smiled, seeing the pure joy in his daughter's eyes. "Yes, my daughter, and more than that, Uncle Ben is going to stay with us." Isabel jumped for joy, and her happiness was contagious to both men. There, in that room of the ranch house, a friendship was born that would last forever, based on mutual respect and the understanding that true wealth lies in the human bonds we build. Ben became not only the manager of the colonel's ranch, but also his advisor and friend. He brought to the ranch management the same values that had led him to save Isabel: compassion, honesty, and an attentive eye to the needs of the humblest. Under his administration, the ranch prospered not only economically, but also as a place where justice and kindness had room to flourish. Isabel grew up seeing in Ben an example of integrity and kindness. She learned from him that true strength lies not in imposing one's will, but in knowing when to yield to what is right. The cowboy who had saved her life also became her moral mentor, teaching her values that no formal education could impart. The colonel, in turn, discovered that true power doesn't come from the ability to dominate, but from the ability to recognize and value kindness wherever it manifests. He learned to wield his authority more wisely, always remembering the lesson Ben had taught him, that a man's greatness is measured by his capacity to do good, regardless of his social standing. Whirlwind, even in old age, remained a living symbol of this philosophy. The horse symbolized the transformation that occurs when genuine kindness finds the recognition and reward it deserves. He grazed in the best pastures of the ranch, cared for with affection and respect, reminding everyone that true generosity always finds its way back. Years later, when Ben had gray hair and Isabel had become a young woman, they still sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. In these conversations, Isabel liked to recall that rainy night when Ben found her on the road, and how that encounter had changed the lives of everyone involved. "Uncle Ben," she would often say, "did you know that when you gave me Whirlwind, you were giving me much more than a horse?" "What was I giving you, girl?" he would ask, though he knew the answer. "Hope," she would reply, her eyes shining with the same light that had captured Ben on that first morning. "You gave me the hope that there are still good people in the world, people who do good without expecting anything in return." Ben would smile, observing the young woman Isabel had become. She had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's strength of character, but she had also developed a special sensitivity for recognizing and valuing kindness in simple people. This, Ben knew, was the result of the lessons life had taught her on that rainy night. The colonel, who often joined these conversations on the porch, would often reflect on how a simple act of kindness had transformed not only their lives, but the entire dynamic of their social relations. The ranch had become known in the region not only for the prosperity of its business, but also for the humane and just way it treated its workers and the openness it showed in helping those in need. "Ben," the colonel said one such afternoon, "do you have any idea how many people have been helped because of the example you set for us?" Ben shook his head, genuinely surprised. "I don't understand, Colonel." "Since you arrived here, we've changed the way we see the world," explained John McGill. "We stopped looking only at our own interests and began to realize that our true strength lies in the ability to uplift those around us." It was true. Under Ben's influence, the ranch had implemented aid programs for needy families, created educational opportunities for the children of workers, and established a medical care system that served the entire local community. None of this existed before the arrival of the cowboy who had saved Isabel. "You already had that kindness in your heart," Ben said humbly. "I only helped the colonel find it." "No," Isabel interjected, "you did more than that, Uncle Ben. You showed us that true nobility lies not in titles or possessions, but in the capacity to love and to serve." These words echoed in Ben's heart like an undeserved gift. He had spent his whole life being a simple man, working honestly and treating everyone with respect, but he had never imagined that his actions could have such a profound impact on people's lives. Over the years, the story of Ben and Isabel became legend in the region. It was told on the porches of ranches, at small-town fairs, and in cowboys' conversations. It was a story that inspired hope and reaffirmed people's faith in human kindness. Some said it was mere coincidence that Ben had found her that night. Others believed it was divine providence. Ben, with his simple wisdom, used to say that it doesn't matter whether it was coincidence or destiny. What mattered was that he had chosen to do good when the opportunity presented itself. "Life puts us before choices every day," he would say to anyone who wanted to listen. "We can choose to walk on by or stop to help. We can choose to keep to ourselves or share with those in need. We can choose to judge or to understand. Every choice we make defines who we are." Whirlwind, even in old age, remained a living symbol of this philosophy. The horse had become a kind of mascot of the ranch, known for his docility and the affectionate way he received visits from the children of the region. Many parents brought their children to meet the horse from the story, and Ben always made sure to tell how he had given the animal to a girl in need without knowing that she was the daughter of the most powerful man in the region. "I didn't give Whirlwind to the colonel's daughter," he would always clarify. "I gave Whirlwind to a girl who needed hope." The fact that she was the colonel's daughter was only a later discovery. This distinction was important to Ben, as it represented the purity of his intentions. He had not acted expecting reward or recognition. He had acted because it was the right thing to do, and that made all the difference. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, as the sun painted the scrub brush and mesquite in golden hues, and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers blooming after a rare rain, Ben sat alone in the corral, brushing Whirlwind with his usual tenderness. The horse, though slower with age, still showed the same affection for the man who had raised and cared for him for so many years. Isabel approached silently, watching the scene with emotion. She had married a young lawyer from the city, a kind-hearted man who had won not only her love, but also Ben's respect and the colonel's approval. The couple lived in a house built on the ranch land, close enough for Isabel to maintain her connection with her family, but independent enough to build their own life. "Uncle Ben," she said softly, so as not to startle the horse. Ben turned, smiling at the young woman who remained, in his heart, the girl she had found on the road. "Hi, girl. How are you?" "I'm fine," she replied, approaching to pet Whirlwind. "But I came here because I have some news to tell you." "What news?" Ben asked, intrigued. Isabel smiled, her eyes shining with the same light that had captivated Ben years ago. "I'm going to have a baby, Uncle Ben. You're going to be a grandfather." Ben felt his eyes fill with tears of joy. He had gained far more than social status or financial stability with his kindness. He had gained a true family, based on love and mutual respect. "Is it a girl or a boy?" he asked, moved. "We don't know yet," Isabel replied, "but if it's a girl, I want to name her Hope, and if it's a boy, I want to name him Ben." The rancher couldn't hold back the tears. At that moment, he understood that his good deed had created a legacy that would extend for generations. The kindness he had shown on that rainy night would continue to live on through Isabel's children and grandchildren, perpetuating itself like a river that never runs dry. When the colonel heard the news, his joy was even greater than Ben's. He had found in his ranch manager not only a business partner, but a true brother, someone who had enriched his life in ways that money could never achieve. "Ben," the colonel said that night, during the dinner that brought the whole family together, "I want you to know that you're not just the manager of this ranch. You're part of this family, and always will be." "I know, Colonel," Ben replied, his voice choked with emotion. "And you are the family I never had, but always dreamed of." That night, after dinner, the three of them sat on the porch as they always did, watching the stars shining in the clear West Texas sky. Whirlwind grazed peacefully in the nearby pasture, and the soft sound of his breathing mingled with the nightly symphony of crickets and owls. "Uncle Ben," she said, "do you believe that people are born good or become good?" Ben pondered for a moment before answering. "I believe that all people are born with the capacity for good and evil, girl. What defines who we are the choices we make throughout our lives." "And what made you always choose good?" she asked. "Maybe it was my mother," Ben replied, his eyes lost in memories. "She always told me that God gave us two eyes to see the suffering of others, 2 hands to help those in need, and a heart big enough to love without expecting anything in return. "Your mother was a wise woman," the colonel commented. "She was," Ben agreed, "and I always tried to honor her teachings." "You honored much more than that," Isabel said. "You honored humanity itself." That night, after everyone had retired, Ben remained on the porch, contemplating the stars and reflecting on the path his life had taken. He thought of the girl he had found on the road, wet and scared, and the strong and kind woman she had become. He thought of the proud colonel who had become a dear friend and a brother at heart. He thought of Whirlwind, the horse he had given away without expecting anything in return, and who had become a symbol of generosity that had transformed lives. But above all, Ben thought about the transformative power of kindness. He had learned that a simple act of compassion can change the course of many lives, creating waves of good that spread far beyond what we can imagine. When the first ray of the next morning's sun touched his face, Ben smiled. He knew that there were many stories like his happening throughout the West Texas plains. Many generous hearts making a difference in the lives of people who needed help. And he also knew that as long as there are people willing to stop on the road to help those in need, the world will continue to be a place where it is worthwhile to believe. Whirlwind approached the porch, as he did every morning, seeking his owner's affection. Ben descended the steps and embraced the horse's neck, whispering in his ear the same words of affection he had said the day he gave him to Isabel. "You're more than a horse, Whirlwind. You're a symbol that kindness always finds its way home." And so, under the golden sun of the West Texas plains, with Whirlwind by his side, and the certainty that he had built a legacy of love and kindness that would last forever, Ben Rodriguez smiled, knowing that he had fulfilled the greater purpose of his life, to prove that true wealth does not lie in what we possess, but in the good we are able to do for others.